joining us. Welcome to our webinar. This is the third part of a three-part webinar mini-series on three-year planning. Where do we go next? Please make sure you identify who is there in the room with you. If you're with colleagues from your consortium, if there's more than one person with you, please identify your name as well as their name, whomever's in the room. This helps us keep track of who all's here and how many people we have. Eileen, thank you for letting us know that you were able to hear us. Appreciate that. We have a really fun webinar happening today. No pressure, Greg, but it's going to be great. We're going to be talking about logic modeling, three-year planning. We're going to, for those of you who were with us last week and week before, we're going to have a few more references to our Mawahil Consortium, which is our hypothetical consortium. For those who don't know, the name Mawahil is a combination of Sharice Moore, Sudi Whalen, and Greg Hill Jr.'s last names, because we're super creative. Thank you, Adele, for identifying yourself as well as the people there in the room with you for Victor Valley College. Anybody else who's there with a colleague, if there's someone watching with you, please let us know who is in the room with you so we can make sure we get an accurate count of everyone. We're going to be starting in about 2 more weeks. Sorry, not 2 more weeks, 2 more minutes, not 2 weeks. I promise I will not leave you on hold for 2 weeks. Welcome, Michael, and anyone else just joining us. This is the third part of our 3-year planning webinar mini-series. This is Where Do We Go Next, where we're going to have lots of fun talking about logic modeling. Does that make you feel pressured every time I tell people it's going to be fun, Greg?
No, I love this stuff. I think it's a blast.
Good.
Whether everybody else does, I don't know. But I think it's really fun.
It's going to be a good time. We have about 1 more minute before we get started. If at any point during the webinar, if you lose connectivity or have trouble hearing, please let us know in the chat pod. We have Melinda and Liberty both here to help. Thank you, Marina. Welcome. Welcome, Jill, and anyone else who's just joining us. Alrighty, let's get started. It is 1 o'clock, January 29, 2019, and I am super excited. We're wrapping up the third part of our 3-part webinar mini-series. I'm going to pass this over to Greg Hill in a few minutes, but before we do that, I do want to go over some quick little housekeeping items. So make sure that at this moment, your speaker icon is currently green and not white. That lets us know that you can hear. So if you're having any difficulty hearing, you might want to check that first. The resources can be downloaded in the resource section on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. The slides are currently in there, so if you want to access those slides and refer back to them, you can. Today's webinar recording, along with those slide handouts, will be included on the California Adult Education Program website, so you can always refer to that later if you need to. Additionally, at the top right of your screen, there's a little guy holding his hand. That's your Set Status button. You can use that at any point during the webinar if you agree with something that we say, if you disagree, if you think we need to speed up or slow down, or if you think we're really funny, you can stick that smiley face up there like so, because I think I'm hilarious, and there's my smiley face. Additionally, our primary method of communication in this during this webinar is going to be the chat pod, and we'll have multiple chat pods and polls and things like that. All you need to do, as some of you have been doing already, is type your message into the chat pod. You can hit enter or click the little chat bubble directly to the right, and that'll send your message there. Later on, when we get into some of our chat pods that are specific to the questions on the screen, we'll see that the layout changes and we have designated chat pods for those. Those will be labeled, and we'll point those out when we get there. Additionally, like I've been saying, if you're attending with a colleague, please let us know. Type your name and the name of your colleague you're attending with into the chat pod if that colleague is not logged in. This helps us get an accurate attendance count, and we really appreciate you doing that. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded for future viewing. It will be posted on the California Adult Education Program website. Should you need technical support during this webinar, please make sure to let us know by typing that into the chat box. If you have any questions between now and then, if you have questions while we're going through the webinar, just about the content or anything else like that, please feel free to use that chat pod. We are monitoring it. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Greg Hill, Jr.
Why, thank you. Thank you, Sudie. Thanks also to Cherise, who's on. And I'm surprised that Neil hasn't chimed in yet. I kind of usually wait, and when I hear Neil talking, that means I'm coming up. But anyway, at any rate, I'm really excited to revisit some of these planning activities with everyone. Last time we did have, or not last time, but we had a logic model webinar that we conducted fairly recently and got a lot of great feedback on it. And while we're not going to rehash the whole thing, I did want to make sure that we were able to provide a little bit more help on what logic modeling is, how it relates to this 3-year process, and then also ideally to be able to perhaps even practice it just a touch. Oh, hi, Amy. You too. Okay, so let's go ahead and get moving here. Yeah, so really quick, our agenda today is we're going to talk about the 3-year planning template, but we'll feel out just how much we have to do that. Well, I suppose we could probably do some recapping of the 2 previous webinars and then get into some action planning. But first, let's start with a poll. How often do you refer to your previous planning documents? Sudie, you actually had expressed this much more eloquently than is currently written. If you want to add clarifying language here, feel free to hop in.
Sure. So basically the question is, how do you use this information when after the 3-year planning process is over, you've already submitted it, at what point do you go back and look at that document? Do you look at it in your planning meetings regularly? So I know of one person at least that says that they carry it around with them. So however you use it or however often you use it, let us know.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So we have some folks who say at least annually. Yep, oh, there we go, pulling ahead with at least annually. Folks, there are some folks, a fair number of folks who said they look at it quarterly, at least once a month, at least once a week. All of those people are lying, but that's okay. Just joking. My hope is that you do live.
I'm going to say, I know at least one person who definitely.
No, it's true. There are certainly those who very much live and breathe on it. But also, we haven't differentiated between which documents, right? And so 3-year plans, 1-year plans, and it's perfectly fine if it's more 1-year plan than 3. But I love that, Bill. Your Fitbit reminds me every hour. You know, that should be an app. That's going to be the next AEP app. It's going to be a daily, quarterly, monthly reminder where it pulls up some kind of reference to the most recent plan you submitted. Chrissy makes a really good point. It most likely also depends on just how new you are to adult education and whether you were involved in writing them. So that's good. So then there is a sense within, among most folks that these plans are intended to really help drive change. And so, one of our goals for this 3-year cycle was to, in truth, help to further promote that impulse and also to be able to help equip you as you, undergo your planning activities and develop and submit your plans, help equip you with a plan in a format that can be easily digested and shared with others and hopefully promote better and, more innovative solutions to the challenges I know all of you are actively facing within your regions. So, okay, so just moving forward here. Really quickly, just as a refresher, three-year planning template has, these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. Just by kind of show of hands, I'm curious to see how many of you feel like you kind of need a refresher on any of these sections. Today, just as a point of reference, we're going to be talking about 2.4. And so depending on how you respond here, I'm going to open it up or I'm just going to move forward.
And to raise your hand, use that Set Status button at the top of your screen. I've just raised my hand as an example. So we have one person who has raised their hand. Okay. Make that 4.
Okay.
5.
Oh, wow.
7.
Okay. Well, that's a fair number of people, actually, and I recognize a number of those folks, and they're no slouches. So let me pull this up, and then I'll share my screen. We'll see if we can go through it quickly.
Let me know when you've got it pulled up, Greg, and I'll go to that layout.
Awesome. Okay. I have it up. Now I'm just going to share my screen.
Everything okay, Greg?
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, no, I know. I keep waiting for it. And share my screen. Yes. Okie dokie. So, for those of you, just as point of reference, while I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see anything else. So I'm going to look to Sudi as others to stop me if there are lots of questions coming through. And if I'm not responding, that's why, because I don't see them. At any rate, for those of you unfamiliar with the 3-year planning template, it is a literal template in that we've taken a Word document, organized it into the required sections, the sections required by the planning guidance, provided space for you to enter in your narrative, as well as form fields to help with that. All the required tables, as well as figures, are also included here.
Hey, Greg, sorry to interrupt you. Can you zoom in a little bit to make the text easier to see? It's kind of hard to see. Thank you, sir.
Sure, and thank you. All right, so I'm zooming out just for a second, then I'll zoom back in, but it's organized around all of those sections, and the idea here is that if you pop in all of your data, all of your information, you'll actually have a neatly formatted plan that you can submit and post without too much hullabaloo with formatting and all of that jazz. I'm focused right here on the front page, which we've gotten some questions about. So in order for this to function as a template, the document has to be locked. Now that doesn't mean it can't be unlocked, and all of you can unlock it. There are instructions here, as well as links to where on the Microsoft website you need to go to understand how to enable the developer tab. It's not complicated. If you ask anybody, I guarantee that whoever is teaching Microsoft Essentials or whatnot in your programs knows how to do this and will happily do it for you. If you like, I'm happy to do it as well. My recommendation is if you do unlock it, if you do plan to use the template in this way, I would recommend locking it back up once you are able to put in whatever text or figures or charts and such that you want to include. This is just to sort of make it a little bit easier for those who are going to be reviewing it after the fact to be able to extract different sections of text and not have to hunt for it and so forth. Anyway, as I'm scrolling through, what we're looking at, this is the front page. This should automatically, once you populate this with your consortium information, headers and footers should also populate accordingly. Got a built-in table of contents, same kind of thing. You would just right-click on this to refresh it once you actually have narrative and your figures placed in here. There are, like we mentioned before, 5 sections other than, 5 sections. The executive summary, which we're all quite familiar with, Section 2.2 pre-planning assessment, which includes the 2 tables around regional service providers and total funding for adult education programs. 2.3 is where you enter a narrative data, narrative information, charts, all that fun stuff related to your community needs assessments, your understanding of, what communities have the highest needs, so on and so forth. And then 2.4, again, which is what we're talking about today, is where you'll enter in all of your narrative describing the plan for the next 3 years, and where you would also include your logic model and identify your 3 to 5 key progress indicators that would, of course, align to that. And then finally, 2.5, piloting and implementation, which we haven't spent a ton of time on, and but I think those of you who've participated in human-centered design will have a clearer sense of what this is about. It's really kind of meant to provide an opportunity for folks to discuss and basically put out there some of the more innovative things that you're planning to do, I would even venture to say your most immediate next steps in terms of what the implementation of your plan is going to look like. Anyway, moving forward, I'm going to scan quickly, so I'm not going to spend time on regional service providers. I'll be glad to field questions about it once I return back to the shared view. But this should be a list of everyone you're participating, who everyone in your region is providing, who's providing adult education training and services within the region. Likewise, total funding for adult education programs and services. The legislation requires that you share all of that information with each other. All we're asking for is the totals right now. So a quick note, one recommendation I would make is to begin, if you're working on this, by unlocking it and taking these out, putting them into a spreadsheet so you can collaborate on them a little bit more effectively. This is our logic model. We'll get into that shortly. And then, of course, the progress indicators which follow from it. And that's it. All of it is posted on the website, on the TAP website, of course. And okay, now we're back. So let me see here. Did we get any questions, Sudhi, that I might have missed?
No, we did not.
Okay, good. I was like, oh my gosh, did I just lose everybody? Anyway, awesome. Okay, I hope that helps. Moving forward, today, like I said, identifying goals and strategies. So this section really is the plan, quad plan. This is where you would identify how and where you will improve program services, outline all of your core strategies, inputs, outputs, all of that fun stuff that you plan to pursue over the next 3 years. It also will, form the foundation for all of your annual plans that you, and all of the other reporting, frankly, that you will do over the next few years. At the heart of this is going to be, at least I think, your logic model. So what is a logic model? A logic model is a systematic visual way to present and share your understanding of the relationships among the resources you have to operate your program, the activities you plan, and the changes or results you hope to achieve. In short, it's effectively a map that is designed to help clarify and communicate how it is that what you have actually goes to support what you intend to do, and that what you intend to do genuinely leads to the outcomes that you have imagined for your region. And so, like a map, it's a high-level view. So I have this little blurb here, and I want to be able to differentiate between, what a logic model roadmap logic model is versus a work plan. So a work plan might be several pages long. It might be highly complex, right? That's not really what we're after here. You know, a work plan would be, if we're going with this map analogy, it would be much more street view, right? The logic model would be sort of the 10,000-foot view. That doesn't mean it's not specific. It doesn't mean that you can't clearly make out where you are and where you're going. It just means that, you know, we're not looking at individual addresses per se, but instead we're sort of seeing higher order, you know, concerns and so forth. Okay. Alan asked a question. I knew it too. Given an approximate of total of 10 combined members and stakeholders, how do you recommend getting input on various parts and iterations as the plan goes forward? Well, let's see here. So if we're talking the plan as a whole, you know, there are lots of different approaches to doing this, of which I'm sure, I mean, Alan, you're a pro at this. You know, if you're thinking like brass tacks, you know, the most traditional thing, right, is to post it and collect feedback through some sort of organized mechanism, and then have structured opportunities to review, and then, in fact, really reply either in the aggregate, probably in the aggregate, to any feedback you may have received. In terms of, but of course that's presuming sort of the, you've done some planning ahead of time. Now, if you're engaging stakeholders throughout, I mean, that's going to be a different matter. Traditionally in strategic planning, right, you would start with some visioning, really identifying what your mission and goal is going to be for the next 3 years, and that would be an expression, and that's actually what the goal statement is about. It would be really kind of a lofty expression of what you intend to achieve at the end of that 3-year cycle. And that is ordinarily done in a smaller group among leadership, and then that's sort of what you sort of trot out and vet with folks as you work out your plan. But anyway, so I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm looking here, Alan. I'm thinking you're going to probably provide a little bit of clarification. If we're talking about the logic model, I actually think that makes sense. This is the more useful tool to try out and get feedback on, because folks will immediately either understand it or they won't. And if they don't, then it probably warrants some revision. Absolutely. Do you remember input directly into the template? Oh, great. So here's actually what I would do. I think there are a couple of approaches you can take. The one is top-down, and the other is bottom-up. And we're actually going to talk about a process for how to complete a logic model here in just a few, but I'll give you a little preview. So if you're dealing with diffuse groups of stakeholders, you know, there is nothing wrong with having each group or each agency, each group of agencies work together to develop individual logic models, and then take those and develop your kind of master logic model, as it were. You know, I've seen logic models that are longer than a page, but rarely. You know, again, it's not that it can't be, but you know, but more than 3 pages, I think, is probably a bit much. Then you're really getting into work plan territory. You know, I actually do think printing and distributing it does make sense. And there's nothing necessarily, for example, too, that limits you to this particular visual expression. So if you Google logic model, you'll see all sorts of really exciting versions. If you've got a good, you know, graphic designer, you know, you can engage a graphic designer and you know, put a really complex and impressive one on logic model on, you know, 11 tabloid-sized paper with lots of arrows and such. And I think that would be worth doing if folks have the time and acumen to do it. I would recommend it. And again, because yeah, I mean, nobody's going to read a 30, 40, 50, 100-page report. And, you know, we are serving, our intent here is to serve our communities, and I have difficulty believing that in the real world that we, that we can do that effectively if how it is we intend to do that, provide services and support those communities, is so complex and obfuscate that folks can't read it. All right, so like, anyway, so that's yeah, I would actually recommend doing this. I will be. Yeah, exactly. And also for Neil, right? Because Neil's going to read these, and poor guy. He's going to, yeah. Anyway. Dana, so we can use a different model besides this one if it works better for us? My answer would be yes and no. Do you have to cram everything into this table? No. Oh, that's funny. Absolutely not. If you want to find a better expression, say for example that's completely graphical, that's great. But it should contain all of the component parts. If you want to add to it, that's perfectly fine. Some folks like to break out different kinds of contextual factors. Or for example, I think I've mentioned this before, I don't see a particular problem with collapsing, say, immediate and intermediate outcomes, or even intermediate outcomes and long-term, depending on the scale of your strategies, that is. But don't shortchange yourselves by starting with a collapsed version. It's really, I wasn't joking for all of you who came in early when I said I really enjoy making these things. I do, and I think you will too. But more importantly, the real value add comes from how the event, how the activity itself helps to really build build consensus and really, I think, get everyone on the same page and keep them on the same page. And so, anyway, yes, Neil will be paying, but you will not be graded by your reports, just silently judged. Just kidding. Okay. All right, logic model components. So what we're looking at here is just sort of the top little header of our logic model. There are a few components. The first is inputs, activities, outputs. So there are some who actually call all of these inputs, and in some cases they are correct. I say that not to confuse you, just to emphasize how definitions for these different different components may vary depending on your grain size. It's not unusual, for example, for if you're in a very large organization and working on some highly complex projects, that an output might actually be the equivalent of an activity elsewhere. But anyway, just putting that out there now, so you don't get too confused later. But anyway, inputs represent, right, the human, financial, and material resources you have or need to do your work. So students, faculty, facilities. If you're, teaching CTE, you need machines and whatever else you need, right? Activities would represent what you intend to do. And so with that, I would actually say it's activities and strategies. And I believe one of these slides differentiates between the two, but ultimately, really what it comes down to is that, strategy is just a higher order and activity is just a smaller unit. Outputs are the measurable, and these are probably the most important one right here. Outputs are the measurable, tangible products that result from your activities. Often they're described in terms of the size and or scope of the services and products delivered or produced by your program. Now we're going to return to this in a bit. But for now, let's move on to outcomes. So we have three outcomes, three categories: short-term or immediate, intermediate, or long-term. Traditionally, the period over which these would occur varies slightly from what we have in our logic model, and that's just simply because the planning cycle is a 3-year cycle. It wouldn't be unusual, say, for example, to find logic models or guidance on logic models that would suggest that, for example, a long-term outcome would be something that you would see, within 5 to 7 years. And I still think that kind of holds true here, but in the sense that the long-term outcomes are a little bit aspirational. They're much harder to measure. They represent really our, in some ways, they actually align to our core goals and values, and are often articulated that way. but yeah, I mean, optimally, we're kind of wanting to see at least some of those changes occur within a shorter time frame. But as I was saying, starting from the front, intermediate or rather immediate short-term outcomes are more or less direct changes that result from, actually should say outputs, direct resulting from outputs, typically expressed in terms of changes in knowledge and or awareness. So most often these would occur within about a year. They're usually, and so when I say that, they're often expressed in terms of changes in knowledge and awareness. They tend to be things like, increased awareness of programs. You know, it might be expressed in terms of satisfaction, right? Students express greater satisfaction. And so when I'm working on logic models and I'm thinking about short term, what I like to think about is, okay, what do I want to know first? You know, what kinds of sort of signposts or milestones will tell me whether the program is actually going along as planned or whether it's starting to go off the rails. And so in this way, it can often be helpful to think of your short-term outcomes as consisting of formative measures. This is not by any means like always the case. It can be a helpful way of thinking about them. Intermediate outcomes, you know, are just what they sound like, right? They link your short-term to your long-term. These are generally expressed in terms of changes in behavior, decision-making, policies, and they also may relate to changes in knowledge and or skills depending on the measure and or time frame. You know, in the first webinar, I didn't include that last part, and the reason why is, you know, I just didn't want to confuse folks. But as I was talking with colleagues after the fact, I began to think about this a little bit more clearly, and you wanted to make sure folks understood that yes, changes in knowledge and skills can and do occur both in the short term and the intermediate term. An example, at least to my mind, you know, might be something like, you know, statistically significant changes in, say, you know, educational functioning level gains, right, among particular populations. So that would be evidence of a change in behavior and a change of knowledge, change in knowledge that would often take more than a year. It might take a year, but it depends again on what you're looking at. Then finally, long-term outcomes are the lasting changes with organizational, community, or systems level benefits, which again are aspirational, harder to measure. So these are pretty lofty. These are like lower unemployment rates, you know, increased transitions between, you know, into the workforce or something. Let's see here. I've got a question here from Alan. I'm going to pause to see if there are some questions as well. So short-term acceptance in apprenticeship program, intermediate completion of through. All right, let's see. Short-term. Okay, so that would be something like, so examples might be for a short-term outcome, acceptance into an apprenticeship program. In intermediate would be completion. Okay, I see. And then journeyman and employment, possibly. I mean, you could even probably back those up a little, depending. I mean, again, it depends on the length of the, how long, you know, what the distance is in terms of time. I would venture to say that if you're thinking of an apprenticeship program that you're just starting, one of your primary and your first and foremost, one of the outcomes would be actually increased awareness of it. People know about it, and that might include, you know, regional employers. It might also include students. You know, it could include things like students become more knowledgeable of opportunities within the field. You know, trying to think. It could also be, you know, I wouldn't say it's anything like entrance into the program. That, to me, is really kind of an output. So, you know, more students enroll in a program, that's just a fact, and that's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not making a sort of significant change in the participants. It's just an initial step toward that change. I think transition into other, related programs, absolutely. Or let's say your plan is to build on an existing CTE program and, develop the pathway so that it gets into an apprenticeship program. I think then that's your starting point. And so, I think, but for your long term, Alan, I think, the long term would be, higher rates of, increased employment within the sector. And so, and so that should be really community-based if possible. Again, we're really trying to make changes there. And so, it could be much further off, and that's okay, as long as, you're able to sort of see the causal chain. From start to finish. All right, we've got a question from Eileen. Short-term discussions on articulations, meetings with college faculty. Okay. So it sounds like, Eileen, what you're asking is, so a short-term might be having discussions on articulation agreements. Intermediate might be meetings with faculty on them. Long-term might be earning college credit. It's possible, but that would be kind of a bummer if that's true. I think that if you really feel like you're like 3 to 5 years off. No, I get it, Eileen, and make no mistake, there's no judgment there. If you're really 3 to 5 years away from being able to establish a cohesive pathway, then I think then that could become, how can I put it? That could either mean that it is not a major strategy, or that it falls under a cluster of other strategies that might be related to improving the quality of your relationship, quality of partnerships, quality of relationships between agencies. Because that's the other thing. It's not necessarily the case, or not always the case, that your key activities are going to be participant-focused in the sense of, student participants. If it's an important feature of, if you have to do other things before, say, being able to reasonably begin to plan a coherent pathway, then that's fine. So then in that case, your participants are really agencies, and that's good, that's fine. But like a lofty goal, I would say I would still stick with the idea of we're thinking students earning college credit. I would actually try to communicate that as an intermediate. Despite, whatever, kind of time binding it would, there would seem to be on this. It just feels to me that it would be, increases in the number of students receiving articulated credit. But again, I don't think if you don't have those pathways established yet, then you may want to actually kind of step back from that and be realistic about what the planning process is going to look like. Because a lot of plans, for example, in the last three-year cycle, had said things like, we're going to build these pathways, and it is tremendously hard. And so when folks look back at those plans, they feel like they failed miserably, when in reality, no, it's just these are complicated, things to achieve. If they were easy, then, we wouldn't have this program. None of us would be here, and so that's why, it does become important to really kind of work with your stakeholders and with your leadership groups to identify what the appropriate grain size is going to be, and to ensure that, that what you intend to do is realistic within the time frame. All right, there are a few folks typing in, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward just a little bit. Oh, great. Okay, 2 more pieces, and then we'll get into process, some process discussions. So The last two pieces are assumptions and external factors. These are another two components. These are two more components that I sort of modified slightly just to sort of make them a little bit clearer following the last webinar. So assumptions represent beliefs or values that buttress your planned approach, which are necessary for success and that you believe are true. To put it another way, these would represent conditions that you expect to remain true throughout your planning cycle. So a very simple one would be there's continued AEP funding. Don't put that in there. We already know it's okay. But for example, that would be an example of one if we weren't already reasonably certain that there will be continued funding. What they wouldn't include would be risks, and that's what these sort of external factors are about. But other assumptions might include, continued collaboration between agencies, between you and your regional workforce boards, say if you have an established relationship. It could include the presumption that you are awarded, that you get WIOA funding or something. Although that's less of that's not the best example, simply because typically when we talk about assumptions and external factors, we're talking about dimensions that are outside of your immediate control. And so these are things that you cannot really control for. You either just simply identify them as, being core presumptions and or, again, risks or other protective factors. So external factors are contextual factors that could potentially enable or limit the success of your project or program. When they're enabling, they would be called protective factors. So like the plant doesn't go down, right? Or let's say somebody builds a plant, right? And in that way, it can often overlap with assumptions. But don't sweat too much trying to make the distinction so long as you're able to really lay bare the conditions under which the success of your program really hinges. Risks are much easier to identify. Those would be limiting factors. Like, a silly example is, I'd say like something, that, I don't know, the economy remains, strong. Again, it's outside of your control. It presumes continued funding. But I think, as you work through this, you'll find more local expressions that kind of meet that criteria a little bit more effectively. All right, just pausing here. Christine has a question. Short-term, students who transition from ABE to ESL to ABE, intermediate students who transition from ABE to CTE, long-term students found a job in the field. I actually think that could work. Yeah, it depends. I mean, again, it really depends, but, maybe. So what we would be saying in that case is this presumes that you actually have a pathway right in place that is designed to help students to really lead them through ESL to ABE to CTE. I wouldn't say that generally, though, that would be an example of if you're speaking generally, I would say no. And the reason why is the logical, it doesn't necessarily follow, for example, that transition into CTE, is going to happen or even should happen, right? That would only apply to certain subsets of students. Furthermore, right, if we're thinking about cases with ESL students in particular, right, if you've got ESL students who come here but who have robust educational backgrounds in their home countries, there may be no real need for them to go through CTE. They just really need to get their English skills up so that they can get jobs within their fields, right? And so, so it depends. It may depend. But of course, that's the real strength of this as an exercise, right? By putting all that down, you get to ask yourself, and with colleagues, supportive colleagues, does this necessarily follow? And so that brings us to the next slide. So if it's helpful, right, it can be helpful to think about the relationship between components as a series of if-then statements. So if we have the resources, so those would be all the inputs you need, all the inputs you have, all the inputs you need. If you have the resources and you do the things that you set out to do, then we would generally expect that XYZ, we would see XYZ results. So if you're beginning a new program, the most immediate and obvious output would be number of enrollments, right? So number of students enrolling in a program. You could get more granular, right, if you're targeting specific populations, right? Number of ESL students enrolling in, workforce training. Or if you're really zeroing in on a core population, you say, number of, I don't know, displaced youth between, with XYZ characteristics, enrolling in XYZ programs. And then, and finally, so those would be your outputs, and then outcomes would follow from that, right? If we get these outcomes, or rather these outputs, then, by continuing to do our, our good work, we would expect to see XYZ outcomes. So we would expect, in this case, for example, participants and communities will benefit and change in XYZ ways. And again, just to reiterate, the participants' communities might be your own, in that you might be seeing changes in how you all participate and communicate with one another as a consortium, if that is one of your primary goals. And I would even venture to say, if you had difficulty getting, doing some of the things that you've seen some other consortia do really well, I don't think it's a problem for you to sort of step back and really kind of treat this cycle as an opportunity to learn to work together more cohesively. You're always going to serve students. You will get outcomes, but you will, but in truth, if you're not finding ways to work together well, you risk your long-term, the longevity, right, of your programs. And so there's nothing wrong with investing in yourselves that way. All right, so. There was a question, Christine sounds perfect in sync with transitions and goals suggested in the bill. Absolutely, 100%, Alan, you're totally right. It's not, the only thing, what I was sort of responding to wasn't necessarily that it can't or shouldn't be that way. Just simply that you want to make sure that there's adequate specificity in your logic model and in your planning, so that you're able to actually facilitate the change. So, for example, just sort of thinking that, folks are going to transition into CTE, that's not really going to happen. And it's not a natural progression, right? It's something that you would have to actually focus on. And I think Alan is right, that is one of the charges of the legislation. But point being that it just, that I don't believe it necessarily just follows from it. So, perfect. Okay. Also, new IET. Yes, beautiful. I love that example, by the way. I'm responding here to Chrissy and Sue. Okay. So, I think, all right. So here's your quick process. So right before you go into doing this work, print out this slide, take it with you. All right, so here's your step-by-step. Number one, prepare. Start by thinking about your project goals / long-term outcomes and work backwards. So if you're like, I don't know what I want to see, that's okay. Then start with the AEP outcomes, right? We know that we must achieve these things. And again, no one is suggesting that you have to see radical changes in 3 years. That's highly unlikely. But But it's a good starting place for you to begin thinking about, the sort of bigger change that you want to make in your communities. So identify those, think about, what you want your community to look like, and then work backwards from there to figure out, okay, what would incremental progress look like? What will we have to do to achieve it? And so forth. One of the things that I like to do is actually begin by assuming the change has occurred, and then doing kind of an archaeology, right? So imagine this is what the world looks like now. How did we get here? In my experience at least, it adds I don't know, it just seems to work a little bit better. And I enjoy it. Anyway, okay. Sudhi's prodding me, and I'm moving. Okay, so next, map. So work collaboratively to generate lists. So I can't emphasize this enough. Dump everything out. So make lists of everything you have, everything you want, all of your assumptions about, what you think is going to be true, what you, really lay bare the stuff that you typically say, well, no, we know that's fine. Start by questioning everything, and then, take it back after the fact. And then use those to help inform some of the strategies, outputs, outcomes that would be most closely associated with those long-term goals. And so, which is to say this, so invariably, once you start talking about some of the challenges you want to face, you'll go into problem-solving mode, and there's nothing wrong with that. My recommendation would be, if you're brainstorming, working together on that, just put it on a different piece of paper, put it on a different piece of chart paper or whatnot, a different whiteboard, and just be able to separate your strategies from your outcomes from your outputs. And once you do that, and you've got your lists, begin to link these things, or I'm sorry, actually begin to cluster them. So we've gotten lots of questions about, we have a giant consortium, how are we supposed to, include everything we're doing on this logic model? And my answer is by clustering them. It's not that you have to itemize every single thing within your logic model. It's perfectly fine and rational and appropriate to group together strategies that are similar, right? Recommendation would be to really group them and label them by areas of focus, and then use those same labels to group and organize your outputs, outcomes, and so forth. And you might find that you'll get the same outcomes from different strategies, and that's perfectly fine. As you move from left to right, you should see less text. If it's very right heavy, then you probably are treating outcomes like something other than an outcome. Finally, oh goodness, let me see here. All right, yep, we're running. So two last things. Lastly, link. Make sure every activity links to at least one output, and that every output links to at least one outcome. It's not uncommon to use arrows to do this. Certainly in planning, I would recommend doing it. Don't kill yourselves trying to make sure that there is one arrow that goes from every single box. Again, it's perfectly fine to cluster things together. In fact, it's really common for inputs, if you do use arrows between your outputs, from inputs to activities, to just have all of your inputs in one box, and then have arrows just pointing to the right. It just will vary. Marketing, increasing number of students, an example of cluster. Actually, if you're looking to increase the number of students, I think that's a goal, but it'd probably be a little bit more specific. So I'm working backwards in what? So what do I want to see? If I'm looking to place more ELLs within entrepreneurship, see more English language learners leading their own businesses, right? Then I would work backwards from there. And so marketing would certainly be a part of that, I think, as a short-term outcome. Increased awareness among potential students of programs, potential and existing students of programs could be a short-term outcome. I think enrollments It could be an output. And also an output could be folks who frankly express interest in, in a program. Number of folks who attend a training program, or rather, not a training program, but a sort of an introductory talk or something, right? Again, it will just kind of vary. Clustering might be, say, I would probably say if a number of related CTE programs. Marketing could be a common strategy, absolutely. It just, I guess it depends on what you're marketing. But what you would measure by marketing, well, no, I take it back. You might be right. So I think you might be right about this, Alan, as you think about it. If you're treating marketing as one of your primary strategies and you're developing a communications plan, yes, you would measure the effectiveness of your communications plan by the extent to which you could connect, student enrollments, student interest, in programs. And so for that case, yes, I think that could work. And so, sorry, Ellen, it took me a minute there. Also, for all of you who are thinking about this and listening, that would be a traditional business approach. Business folks tend to have marketing communications as a core strategy, as well as management, which is perfectly acceptable. Anyway, all right, I'm moving fast. All right, I know I'm moving. Sorry. All right. Finally, verify. Make sure that everything is actually logical. This is where you want to connect with folks and see what they think. Okay, so let's do our quizzes because I think they're important, and then we'll just move forward. All right, pop quiz. Boom, 4 questions. 1, which of the following statements about logic models are true? No one's answering yet. All right, there we go. Hey, good. Select all.
If you guys could go ahead and read and answer all 4. We don't have very much time left, but we do want to get to all 4.
Yeah, that would be really good. Thank you, yes. So feel free to move on to the other questions. So they are, which of the following are true? What is an input, basically? What is an output? And then finally, which one is an output, short-term outcome? How are they supposed to how do they respond to that? How can they do that?
Which one?
The last one. I don't think they can respond to that because that's more of a mapping thing. So it's like each one of them is something. The question is, which one is it?
Yeah, it says identify which of the following is. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Oh, is it? Yeah, sorry. I wasn't clear about that.
That doesn't work.
All right. So
it does not compute.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, sorry.
I'm just going to take that one away.
I'll just keep going. Yeah. Actually, put it back up, and I'll give people the answer, unless you just deleted it, but okay. So first things first, everyone is right so far about which of the following statements is true about a logic model. Yes, they're systematic visual representations. They're similar to roadmaps. They are not supposed to be super duper long, but that doesn't mean that they lack specificity. Again, I really like, creating them on tabloid paper. Well, I mean, I would actually say use chart paper and then get them onto tabloid so that you can have a couple nice pages. An input is, number 1, what you plan to do to bring about the change using resources you have. 2, human financial materials you need. Or 3, anything that could impact the success of your project. The answer is B. An input would be the human financial or material resources you have or need. What you do, what you plan to do to bring about change would be an activity or a strategy. But again, they can be often confused depending on your grain size. But when push comes to shove, an input is a thing, is a resource, it's expendable, it's a thing you need that you have, or it's something that you have that you need. Right? Lastly, output. An output, what you plan to do to bring about change using resources you have. No, that is an activity. Although I understand that impulse. 2, a change in participants' awareness, skills, etc., that serve as a precondition for intermediate long-term outcomes. I imagine some of you clicked that because it had the precondition for other outcomes, but the answer is no. It is the measurable, tangible product that results from program's activities. So case in point, the best example of an output is students who enroll, right? So for example, if you want to get students, into high-paying jobs, you can't say, start a program and, and then all of a sudden magically they get jobs, right? First and foremost, they got to enroll. They got to be there. And if you don't have increases in enrollment, then you cannot, absolutely, no way, actually get people into jobs. Anyway, okay. So we have about 3 minutes left. Yeah, okay. Darn it. I really tried to be fast. We're going to do some practice on that. But the one thing I'm going to say about this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cherise, is in addition to your logic model, you will want to identify 3 to 5 progress indicators. These really should be SMART objectives, and they should really align directly to what you've got in your logic model. They may refine them somewhat, they may expand on them somewhat, but there should be no question that, that they're not connected. And so you've got a really good example here. By May, 2019, increase the number of agencies that have aligned CTE pathways and developed comprehensive program maps from 2 to 10. Notice the specificity. You may not, for example, in your logic model, you may just have something like, increases in the number of agencies with aligned pathways, right? If you want to be daring, then you can add specificity there too. But what these represent would be, your signposts, your milestones for measuring your progress over the next few years. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. We've not seen the 3-year plan. Nova will be uploading the template into Nova. We directly. That's a Neil question, and so I know Cherise.
He's responding to it right now.
Yeah. Did you want to chime in, Cherise, and just take us home? I know it's.
Sure, I'm going to take us on home. Okay, so I think this webinar really provided us with some groundwork so that we could really start to see the links and the chains of how we go from what we're doing to where we want to be in the logic model plan. We had some chat pods identified for you to share what you plan to do next, and really what we wanted to have you think about was how you're going to be using the logic model after submission or as you're planning, and then how you're going to use your plan after submission. We don't have a significant amount of time left to do that, but what I'd really like for you to share with us some feedback on is the third question here, which is what lingering questions do you have about the 3-year planning documents and resources that are available to you, if any. Again, any lingering questions, and if you can type that in, it will help us to prepare for further training as we want to better support you and continue to support you in the field. That's going to be the chat box that's on the bottom right of what you're seeing. Not the everyone chat, but the what lingering questions do you have. So take a moment to just go ahead and respond to and I appreciate your hanging in. We're going to go over just a little bit of time today because we do want to share with you our next steps so that you are ready to move forward. And I want to give you a chance to, again, share any lingering questions that you have. So thank you for hanging in there with us. We won't be much over, but we will be just a tad. And we really appreciate the questions that you had throughout. And if you didn't get to ask those, please share those now as well.
And while you guys are doing that, I just put the link to caladulted.org into our chat box. From that website, on the home page, you'll see a link that says 3-year planning tool. I'm going to copy the link for that as well and stick it in there. All the resources we have shared with you guys over the past 3 webinars are located there. That page is broken down by section of the planning template, so you can actually, or section of planning template and guidance, I believe. So that will actually help you with your planning. So if you're looking for something specific to logic modeling, you can find those resources by selecting that section. Additionally, if you need support with planning, if you need a planning consultation, if you need professional development, if you need help with data, if you need help with ed technology or anything of that nature, please use that request support link at the top of the caladulted.org website, and you can request support directly through TAP. There is no additional fee for that.
Thank
And
you,
thank
Sudie.
you, Melinda, for
Again,
sharing that link.
I see the links that are here under the everyone chat. I know it's sometimes hard to type your questions when others are talking. So again, lingering questions that you may have, feel free to type those there. We will be taking your questions and answering them and then posting them for you so that you can get the responses quickly to those in writing. I know that helps too.
So this is Greg again, just to interrupt. You know, one of the things that we were planning to do was a little bit of kind of workshopping to add greater specificity to this logic modeling process. And, you know, that's something that we can have some focused time on if you feel like that's a need. And I'm happy to stay on if folks are wanting to stay on to do some of that. But anyway, so I just wanted to offer that up, depending on how other folks felt about it.
All right, thanks for that, Greg. And we are still here, and it looks like the great majority of the participants are still able to be with us. The questions that have come up, unclear as to the level of specificity and detail required in some of the sections. Neil or Greg, if you wanted to answer that now. And will the 3-year plans be better than before by not having too much oversight in the process? That's funny, Neil. Could we get some specific examples? Generic is often confusing. We had that asked for a couple of times. Do we upload the template into NOVA and work on the 3-year plan in NOVA, or complete the 3-year plan and then upload it as a completed doc? So Neil
I'm
and
sure
Greg, why don't you
in
answer
reference
those?
to Alan. In reference to Alan's question, Greg can speak more to this, but they do have fact sheets that are coming out that should really help you with that 3-year planning.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and thank you, Sudie. So we are, yeah, we're a little delayed, but I'm really excited about them. We're going to be releasing some fact sheets as well as a map, which I know we've talked about a lot. But this year they're going to be really pretty robust, and hopefully will provide you with insight into the needs of your region that will allow you, that will very much sort of extend beyond this planning cycle. And so, so that's one. In terms of, you know, specificity around, you know, various aspects of the plan, you know, it's interesting. Like I said, once we get through some of these questions, we can do some work on a logic model using a scenario or two that, you know, we've come up with, if that's helpful. As for the other, you know, sections, it's kind of a catch-22 where if there's, you know, too much, I guess, oversight, too many, too much oversight, maybe too much specificity, folks get paralyzed, and then they treat this reporting process as though it's just a compliance exercise. In fact, while yes, that's an important part of receiving funding and so forth, it's really, what we really try to do is make this process easier for all of you to undergo, and also, you know, a process that would actually help you, you know, develop more robust plans. And so if you've been on some of the earlier webinars, you might have heard me say that it's kind of strategic planning light. And so that's pretty much what it is. It's, if you zoom out, you know, and Alan, I know that, for example, you were very much involved in AB 86. I was there earlier. the first, 3 sections are more or less the gap analysis, right? So what did you do? How well do you do it? What do you got? What do you need? What should we do to address, what should we do to address some of the core needs within the community? And then it's really just that last section that deviates only slightly in that it's asking for a little bit more specificity and, wants you to think about prototypes and so forth, in part to kind of release the stigma of, trying things and failing and being afraid of, I think, retribution from, your other stakeholders or your members. And the logic model is really a tool to help, you communicate and identify and communicate, right, your overall approach over the next 3 years. I don't know. I'd be very curious to see the click-through rate on, those 3-year plans that are posted online. I can only assume that they're reasonably low. A good logic model will promote significant visibility, transparency, and I think actually, improve collaboration because people will know what you're doing.
Greg, I'm going to interrupt you quickly, and there's a couple other questions. I don't know if we can answer those right now, but one is about aligning all of the plans together that folks are working on, and if you can speak to how the logic model might be a tool to help think through aligning all of those other plans together, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, Graciela, I think, there are a few ways that this can work. And now, Graciela, I think your question is more about, there are lots of planning initiatives. We write lots of plans. Can we make this plan, is this yet another plan, or is it just another expression of the plans we've already written? And my answer to that would be it's a bit of both. It should be, I think, it should synthesize, the work that you have already committed to regarding, serving this population, the adult learner population. There is utterly no reason why you should have 6 different plans that are all essentially the same plan. What I think this planning cycle can provide you the opportunity to do, however, is consider all of those other related planning activities and, really kind of connect with your stakeholders and see how it is that you might, you might have all of these different initiatives for your own consortium kind of coalesce into one unified vision. And so, if you've already written WIO plans, if you've already written strong workforce plans, then start there, right? And all of those plans will have, a lot of the information you might need to know about your communities. You've already made some decisions about what you plan to do. And so start there. Start from the fact that you've already committed in these ways. So either extend it, I would say, there it is. I would say, this is an opportunity to either synthesize, augment, or extend. And that's perfectly fine. I think that's, in fact, not only perfectly fine, it's the intent.
Okay, and thank you for that, Greg. The other question that came up is about the level of specificity, and a couple people are asking about that. Is it more the overarching strategies, or at the activity level for the outcomes, are we looking for much more specific?
It shouldn't be any more specific than, sorry, Sharif. It shouldn't be any more specific than the 3-year plan was last time, right? In that, again, it's a 3-year cycle. And yes, absolutely, every agency could conceivably have their own individual plans. Most likely they will and do. Whether you work on those collaboratively or only come together to hash out intersections for reporting cycles like this. If the question is, how much detail needs to be in there, right? Do we have to list every single strategy that every single member is going to do, no, I don't think that would make a lot of sense. I think what you would want to do is instead, include, this is where you would, cross. So if you're working sort of top or bottom up, then you would want to start by crosswalking strategies that you know you're already planning to do based on your sort of localized needs, right? So case in point, we see lots of data related to consortium needs, and that's important, and it's valuable for thinking about what the needs are as a whole for your regions. But at the same time, there are very big differences between the needs of a rural adult school and an urban community college, and even if they're in the same, the same region. And so there are going to be differences there, and those differences aren't, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's doing different things. It just means that you're executing strategies in ways that are locally appropriate. And so, it's not, again, it's not really an exercise in compliance. It's meant to sort of get everybody on the same page around what you're doing. Getting more specific, Emma, to your question, I think, if you're starting from the end, then what you're really doing is saying, okay, what do we as a consortium want to measure our success by for this cycle? And so that might help you prioritize which strategies that you want to highlight or provide greater specificity about within your 3-year plan. Because again, I read on some level, all of your schools are going to provide ESL programs, right? There's no good reason to write, pages on, how many sections are going to be provided, how many students you plan to serve for, across every agency. But it might be useful, for example, to say, as a whole, we plan to expand our ESL programs to these areas, and here is why, and then identify some, basic outcomes that should follow from that. So by expanding our programs in ESL, we expect to see the following outputs, right? Increased enrollments, in ESL from these populations within this region. We also are providing XYZ and to help transition here and there, whatever. And so it's really less about, treating it like the kitchen sink and instead thinking about prioritizing what really warrants visibility. Yeah.
Emma has a very specific question in terms of the level of specificity, and I think you said in your answer that we're expanding ESL in this area, but she wanted to know, does she write that, or does she write such and such school will be opening up 3 new sections? And I think you sort of answered that you didn't need the detail by the school level, but you could say our broader purpose this year is to grow this program across the consortium.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
so I think
100% on. Yeah.
Got all of the questions here. So I was corrected that there won't be a written response to these questions. So I'm glad we were able to stay on and continue that dialogue a bit. We have our last quick poll, and then we'll be wrapping up. So at this point, we want to know if you feel well prepared and ready to plan, if you feel reasonably prepared, if you're still a little uncertain about what to do next, or if you still need help with something if you do feel a little uncertain about what to do next. And you can type in what that other is in the general chat pod there for the bottom one. So if you could take a minute and give us a feel for that. We did this 3-webinar mini-series to try and get you as prepared as possible, but sometimes we're right on the mark, sometimes we miss it, and we want to get your feedback on it. Looks like most of you feel either well prepared and ready to plan or reasonably prepared. So that helps us. For those of you, oh, now they're coming in. For those of you that said you still feel a little bit uncertain about what to do next, please let us know by typing in the chat what it is that you still need more help with beyond what we just talked about in the questions before. Thrown off by the word template. Elena, can you explain a little bit more about what you mean there? And again, we do have planning consultation for any of those who need it, so please use that as a resource through AAP TAP. We want to make sure that if you still need help with some specific areas that we can get you some planning consultation to help with that. Okay, thank you, Eileen, for that. Some of us are the same way. Okay, thank you, Sudie, for adding in the link there. And others, I see you typing as well. Thank you for everyone who voted. All right, and so just again, as we wrap up, we've given you the opportunity to ask your questions and share concerns that you had earlier. If there's anything remaining that you want to share, please use the Everyone chat at this moment to do that for us. We appreciate all the feedback, and you will also get, obviously, an evaluation page that pops up after the webinar. But we thank you for participating. We know that many of you were with us from the first webinar through this one, and we wish you good luck in your planning. And if we can be of support in any way, please do reach out. Again, we have the planning consultations available for those of you who may need it. Have a great one, and thanks for staying late with us. Bye-bye.
Sharice, Liberty had one announcement she needed to make really quick.
Yes, Liberty, I'm transitioning to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for a really informative and engaging webinar today. Just a reminder that the recording of this webinar will be available online on the California Adult Education website. And the next webinar on closing out 16-17 adult education funds in NOVA will be available on February 15th. And the link to register can be found in the chat box. After the webinar ends, an evaluation link will open on the screen, and we really encourage participants to complete this evaluation as it supports our efforts of continuous improvement. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Liberty and Melinda, for the support today.